100 years of devoted service to the nation deserves to be recognized and celebrated.
The Queen and the Duke certainly do seem particularly at ease here. It was the Duke himself who decided that they should spend the actual day of their anniversary on Malta for this very private of public couples. Quite a romantic gesture.
Finish?
Prince Philip has walked 2 steps behind Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth ever since she became Queen in 1952.
I've seen the world's most experienced pluck on them.
For many years before then, and many years since, he has been the supporting man, husband, and father that the royal family has needed him to be. For over 6 decades, he has fulfilled his duty as Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Over the years, his personality has shone through in his charitable work and public appearances. He is not your run-of-the-mill stiff upper lip royalty by any means. His wit and charm has endeared him to many, and sometimes got him into trouble. But he will always be admired for his lifetime of duty.
Well, back to work.
Your father, the Duke of Edinburgh, is in hospital at the moment. Do you mind me asking how he is at the moment?
Well, as far as I'm aware, well, I did speak to him the other day, so he's a lot better, thank you very much indeed, and he's looking forward to getting out, which is the most positive thing. So we keep our fingers crossed.
Sense frustration at being in hospital?
Just a bit. I think that gets to all of us. So so yeah, you can only watch the clock so many times, and you know, the walls are only so interesting.
Well, we all wish him well.
You're very kind.
Thank you very much for
Steve, and
talking
thank
to us
you.
today.
We've had some brilliant and lovely messages from all sorts of people, and we really appreciate that. So, and so does he. I've been passing them on, so it's fantastic. Thank you.
Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark was born in Monrepos on the Greek island of Corfu on June 10, 1921. The only son and 5th and final child of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg. After a suffocating loss during the Greco-Turkish War, a revolutionary court banished Philip's father from Greece for life, and he evacuated the country with his family aboard HMS Calypso. It was a difficult and strenuous upbringing, fraught with tragedy, moving from place to place.
Prince Philip was born on the Greek island of Corfu. His father was in the Greek army, and eventually the family were exiled from Greece and went to live in Paris, where Prince Philip was sent to school. Then his mother, who was mentally very fragile, went into a sanatorium, and it was decided it would be better for Philip to be educated by his cousins in England. So he was sent to school in England and lived with his cousins, the Marchioness of Milford Haven, and then he eventually was sent to Gordonston. But all this made him very independent and very strong, and he never says, he always maintains he didn't have an unhappy childhood. It was probably a very interesting childhood because he travelled from a very, very early age, and also they were a very grand family. They were princes of Greece and Denmark, so they were related to both sides. And they were actually also related to all the houses of Europe. So they had a lot of very influential relations. And when there wasn't any money, their relations paid for them, as was the way it went in those days. His mother was Queen Victoria's great-granddaughter, and his mother was born in Windsor Castle, actually. And his mother was also Lord Louis Mountbatten's sister. She was stone deaf. So as a young boy, Prince Philip learnt sign language. But he understood his mother. And also, they were so international, the family, that they spoke in French, they spoke in German, and they spoke in English. They didn't really speak in Greek, but they did speak all the other European languages. They thought that being educated in England with his cousins would be more stable for him. And also, if you think about it, you know, it was the outbreak of Nazi Germany. And they thought it would be better for Philip to be out of Europe and in England. It would be safer for him. Prince Philip fulfilled his military service in the Royal Navy. He was educated at Dartmouth College, and then he left college and went straight into the Navy, and he actually saw action, and he saw the Japanese surrender at the Battle of Matapan.
Philip finally found stability in the Royal Navy in 1939 when he became a cadet at the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, the very place he would meet his future bride, Elizabeth.
Well, Prince Philip actually said that, you know, if in a way, he'd rather have gone into the Air Force than the Navy. But again, Louis Mountbatten was pushing him towards the Navy, and he didn't regret it. But he always loved flying. I think that you'll find that a lot of royal family members love flying because it's the freedom and being in control of your own aircraft. So Prince Philip trained at a place called White Waltham, and he was given his wings, so he could fly on his own. But certainly the Prime Minister of the day, Winston Churchill, was not very happy about the idea of Prince Philip being the Queen's husband flying and possibly having an accident. And I think the Queen was nervous about it too. But but she wanted Philip to have some independence, and that was a great leap towards independence for him, being able to fly, and then he learnt to fly helicopters, so it gave him a lot of freedom.
100 years of devoted service to the nation deserves to be recognized and celebrated. And it therefore gives me great pleasure to present this, my banner, to the Army Cadet Force at the start of its centenary year. It will be taken to every county of the United Kingdom, and it will be seen at parades and services held to mark this historic year for the Army Cadet Force. Let it be a token of appreciation of past endeavors and an encouragement for the future.
Elizabeth and Philip were first introduced to one another when Elizabeth was just 8 years old. According to eyewitnesses, it was at the wedding of Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, Philip's cousin, and Prince George, Duke of Kent, Elizabeth's uncle, in 1934. It wasn't until 5 years later, when Elizabeth was 13 and Philip was 18, that the two met again at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. This time, Elizabeth fell in love with the man who would become her future husband.
Princess Elizabeth met Prince Philip at a family wedding, but she can't really remember that moment. The reason we know so much about it is because her governess, Marion Crawford, talks in great detail about their first meeting at Dartmouth College, where Prince Philip was a naval cadet. And he was very, very good looking, 18 years old, very striking, blonde looking. And he was assigned to look after the two princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, for the day, for their visit, while their parents went around the college. I mean, it was quite strange to think of an 18-year-old looking after the princesses, the oldest of whom was 13. but he decided that it would be fun if they jumped the tennis nets. So he took the princesses outside and he jumped the tennis nets for them, and they were very, very impressed. Later he went on board the vessel that the King and Queen had come to Dartmouth in, and he had lunch, and then the following day he went and had tea. So that was the meeting that the princess remembered.
Elizabeth was just 21 when their engagement was announced on July 9, 1947. The engagement was not without controversy. Philip had no financial standing, was foreign-born, and had sisters who had married German noblemen with Nazi links. Before the marriage, Philip renounced his Greek and Danish titles, officially converted from Greek Orthodoxy to Anglicanism, and adopted the style Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, taking the surname of his mother's British family. Just before the wedding, he was created Duke of Edinburgh and granted the style His Royal Highness.
When her engagement to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten of the Royal Navy is announced, the heart of the world is thrilled by the prospect of one royal wedding with a genuine aura of romance. A former Greek prince, Philip gave up his Greek citizenship to become a British subject. On the eve of the wedding, the king elevates him to the peerage, and he becomes officially His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Earl of Merioneth, and Baron Greenwich. From all over Christendom, gorgeous and regal gifts pour into Buckingham Palace. Among them, lovely crystal pieces, including a delicately chased crystal bowl from the President of the United States. From prince and commoner, tokens of esteem and good wishes by the hundreds are acknowledged individually by Elizabeth with the simple sincerity of any well-bred young woman who punctiliously observes the amenities despite the tremendous demands upon her time. This picnic hamper from Sister Margaret is covered with alligator skin. The Swiss watchmakers send one of their finest. From Burma and Bombay to Regent Street in London, jewels from governments and family have been showered on the bride.
Well, when Elizabeth and Philip got engaged, they decided that because London was ravaged by war and a lot of the buildings were absolutely rubble, and there was unemployment, there was rationing, it was in a really bad place. The king thought, well, let's have a very quiet wedding at St. George's Chapel, Windsor. No pomp, no ceremony, we'll just be very private. But then the government, surprisingly, said, no, 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 we need to lift the people's spirits. Let's have a beautiful royal wedding that everybody can see. So that is what ended up happening. And it was televised, and eventually the television got to America. So it became a global affair, and it did lift people's spirits in London hugely. To see this beautiful young couple married, no one had seen anything like that for the years of the war.
Elizabeth and Philip were married on 20 November 1947 at Westminster Abbey. They received 2,500 wedding gifts from around the world. Because Britain had not yet completely recovered from the devastation of the war, Elizabeth required ration coupons to buy the material for her gown, which was designed by Norman Hartnell. In post-war Britain, it was not acceptable for Philip's German relations, including his 3 surviving sisters, to be invited to the wedding.
In England, the man doesn't take the wife's title. The woman takes the husband. So when Princess Elizabeth became queen, he didn't become king because that was her title and it didn't pass to him. But conversely, when the Queen Mother became queen, she took her husband's title. So she was married to King George VI and she was Queen Elizabeth because she took his title. But it doesn't work the other way round. Well, from Prince Philip's perspective, this is someone that had to leave their country. They didn't have a home of their own. All his sisters were married to German aristocracy and lived in enormous castles, and there's Philip, living off the goodwill of his relations. So I think that the idea of marrying a princess that was going to inherit so much must have been very attractive. And he was pushed by his uncle, Louis Mountbatten, who was the great kingmaker. And he really pushed Philip into kind of maintaining a relationship with Princess Elizabeth, who she was completely smitten with him from the age of 13. And I think she wrote to him to say, thank you for entertaining us at Dartmouth. And I suppose it gradually kept up. Then, of course, during the time when he was on leave, on shore leave, he often went to stay at Windsor Castle. And that's when their relationship, became more serious. And eventually, he proposed to her at Balmoral.
And now the great hour arrives as the Queen and Princess Margaret Rose leave Buckingham Palace for the ceremony at Westminster Abbey. And Prince Philip, with split-second timing, also departs for the great rendezvous. The royal standard waves over a truly royal occasion as the state coach with Elizabeth and the King is escorted to Westminster Abbey by the household of cavalry guards, a sovereign's escort. Pomp, pageantry, and splendor are revived for this day in austerity-ridden London, a day which the world shares with Britain. This is the moment for which the teeming millions have been waiting for months. A deep-throated roar swells in volume as cheering thousands greet the princess. The drabness of the day is forgotten. Westminster Abbey, scene of splendor on great occasions through its 900 years of British history, the royal coach arrives at the great west door, through whose portals the mighty of old England have passed. It is a radiant bride-to-be, the loveliest the old Abbey has ever looked upon. Here at Britain's historic shrine, where all the kings have been crowned, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, and His Royal Highness, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, are wed in the same ceremony that has united English couples from village to palace for centuries. Here they plight their troth.
Ordinance in the
In the proud words of King George, our daughter has married the man she loves. Elizabeth and Philip take their places on history's pages. To the stirring strains of Mendelssohn, they march as man and wife toward the west door amidst nearly 3,000 invited spectators. It is a deeply moving occasion, and yet a supremely happy one for the King and Queen as well as the Queen Mother. The Duke and Duchess of Gloucester and Duchess of Kent are followed by the royal couple of Holland. Lord and Lady Mountbatten follow, and in the train are members of all the remaining royal households of Europe.
Elizabeth gave birth to her first child, Prince Charles, on 14 November 1948. 1 month earlier, the king had issued letters patent allowing her children to use the style and title of a royal prince or princess, to which they otherwise would not have been entitled as their father was no longer a royal prince. A second child, Princess Anne, was born in 1950.
Her Royal Highness is the proud and happy mother of a prince. The salute is fired, and in the monarch's home lies the infant boy who will one day be king. On Saturday, the eminent gynecologist Sir William Gilliot was called to the palace for the most responsible case in even his career. By his advice, Sister H.M. Rowe was chosen midwife. The whole country knew that the baby would soon be born. All day on Sunday, people waited outside the palace, including phlegmatic pressmen with whom it is a point of honor to show no excitement. And all day there was no announcement. It was after 10 at night that those who waited, and they were very many, heard the tremendous news, a royal baby and a boy. Radio gave no advantage to watchers at the palace. The glad tidings went out everywhere.
This is the BBC Home Service. It has been announced officially from Buckingham Palace during the past hour that Her Royal Highness, the Princess Elizabeth, Duchess of Edinburgh, was safely delivered of a prince at 9:14 p.m. today, and that Her Royal Highness and her son are both doing well.
The press agencies were covering the world. The miracles of modern communication spanned the globe. Unto us a child is born, and no ordinary child, a prince. For the moment, all other news took second place. The morning newspapers went to press with one of those rare, warm stories that touch every heart. Cable and radio brought thousands of messages of congratulation from every corner of the Commonwealth. The young royal mother, herself a child but little more than yesterday, lay at her parents' home, an infant prince at her side. By custom, the Home Secretary was among the first informed. When he arrived at the Home Office next morning, the announcement hung outside. Mr. Chutereed was not called to the palace. No one feared in this day and age that some other child would be foisted on the nation. Privileged on this royal occasion to drive through Marble Arch into the park were a king's troop of Royal Horse Artillery. It was their honor and proud duty to fire the salute of 41 guns announcing the birth of a prince.
Prince Philip loves babies and small children, and he was so happy that his firstborn should be a son and heir. But he wanted his son to be an image of himself. He wanted him to be macho, and he wanted him to be sporty, and he wanted him to have a sort of very strong personality. Well, Charles wasn't like that at all. He was very timid. He wasn't particularly sporty. He was a little awkward, and he wasn't really the son that Philip hoped he'd have. So as Charles grew, their relationship just didn't work. Philip would, sort of bark orders at Charles, and Charles would cringe and be timid. They just didn't rub along well together. And then when it came to Charles's further education, Philip said, well, what was good enough for me would be good enough for Charles. And he actually thought that Gordonston would be good for Charles because it was up in the north of Scotland, away from the press. It was meant to be wonderful outdoor life, and great emphasis was placed upon the training of the mind as well as the training of the brain. And Philip thought it would be perfect. I think the Queen and the Queen Mother probably thought that he would be, being such a sensitive young man, he probably would have been better to go to Eton, which was, just across the bridge from Windsor, and he would be nearer his family. But Philip overruled that, and he was sent to Gordonston. Yes, Prince Philip felt very aggrieved by the fact that he wasn't able to give his own children his surname. Now, Prince Philip's family name had been Battenberg, but it was changed because it was too Germanic. It was changed from Battenberg to Mountbatten, and Philip wanted Mountbatten as the family name. He wanted it to be the House of Mountbatten. And when the royal circles, I think Queen Mary heard of this, she said, no way is this going to be the House of Mountbatten. I'm not having Louis Mountbatten, attach his name to the immediate royal family. So it became the House of Windsor. And Philip was very, very hurt. So later on, it became Mountbatten Windsor, so that he could also have his name included. And the first of his children, which was when Princess Anne married, on the marital register, it does say Mountbatten Windsor.
New joy has come to the royal family in the birth to Princess Elizabeth at Clarence House of a second son. But of course, the joy is not restricted to the royal family, and messages of congratulation from all over the world have been pouring into the princess's home ever since the news became known. The early years of marriage have set the seal on the happiness of the princess and her husband. The blessing of children has come not only to enrich their lives, but also to establish securely the line of succession. In Prince Charles, the public has acquired a new popular subject of interest, of whom some delightful pictures have been taken. We should like to see more of him, but the insatiable demand of the public has had to bow to the princess's very proper determination that her son shall not be spoilt by publicity. The public will be no less curious to see the first pictures of his brother, to compare the likenesses and note the differences. To Sir William Gilliatt, the great gynecologist, fell the medical responsibility of seeing the new prince safely into the world. The nurse was Miss Helen Rowe. Everything possible to ensure the safety and health of mother and son was naturally done, but there must always be anxiety. That is now over, and the nation's rejoicing is marked by a salute of guns. This is fired in Hyde Park by the Royal Horse Artillery in full dress.
Prince Philip was stationed in Malta on board his ship, and so the Queen would visit him every few months. And Prince Charles, it was their first child, was left behind, and then the Queen was able to actually sort of, for the first time and probably the only time in her life, be like any other housewife. Wasn't quite the same, but she was able to go shopping, she was able to have her hair done, she was able to drive around the island, and they all went to sort of like naval dances, and they just sort of joined in with the life of the other young naval officers and their wives. And for her, it was just a huge pleasure. And that's why she has such a fondness for Malta. Well, I think the reason that the Queen is referred to by some historians as the unlikely Queen is that, you know, she wasn't prepared to be Queen. She was married in 1947, and she expected to have a proper, long-ish married life before her father, you know, died. But he died quite suddenly. So she was an unlikely queen. And also she wasn't designated to be queen because her uncle, who became Edward VIII very briefly, abdicated and put Elizabeth directly in the line of succession.
During 1951, George VI's health declined, and Elizabeth frequently stood in for him at public events. When she toured Canada and visited President Harry S. Truman in Washington, D.C. in October 1951, her private secretary, Martin Charteris, carried a draft accession declaration in case the king died while she was on tour.
What happened was the Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip were standing in for the King and Queen, and they started a big Commonwealth tour in Kenya, as it was called in those days. And the people of Kenya wanted them to be there, and they'd given them a lodge for their wedding present. And the sort of joy for them was that they were going to visit this game reserve, and there was a little place called Treetops, which was overlooking a salt lick, so you could really see the animals. You know, this is 1952, so the whole of Kenya was teeming with game, and they spent the night up there. And actually, it was during the night, unbeknownst to the princess, that she became queen. So they left their game viewing, went back to Sagana Lodge, and had a little sleep because they'd been up all night. When the news came across to Prince Philip's private secretary, Mike Parker, that the king had died, and he thought that he eventually had one of those little radios, and he fiddled with it, and eventually he heard the sounds of Big Ben, and he knew that the news was true. And it was his duty to tell Prince Philip, which was probably, he says later, the most difficult thing he'd ever had to do in his life. So he went to Prince Philip and told him the news that his wife, Prince Philip's wife, was queen. So Prince Philip was in such shock, he just put a newspaper over his face and let the news just absorb. And then he got up and he went and got the princess out of her bedroom where she was resting and took her down to the lake at the bottom of the garden. And the lady in waiting tells a wonderful story. She watched them walk up and down, and she knew that he was telling her. And when they walked back into the lodge, she was putting her arms around the princess when she thought, my goodness, but she's queen, and dropped into a curtsy. And then, of course, they had to make their way back to England as quickly as possible. But by the time they arrived back at London Airport, she came down the steps, beautifully dressed in her black clothes, and Prince Philip waited on the steps until she was at the bottom, and she greeted her Prime Minister. And that's how it was going to be from then on. Well, I think Prince Philip never envisaged that his young princess would become queen so quickly. They thought they had years ahead of them. So I think it was very difficult when suddenly his wife became queen. And he was demoted, if you like, to forever walk 2 steps behind. And he was treated very badly by the stuffy old courtiers at the palace. And they thought he was an interloper. He was far too German. And although he was a Greek prince, he had a lot of German blood, so they just called him, they just thought he was German. And so it was very, very difficult for him. Well, Prince Philip had been in the Royal Navy. He was still in the Royal Navy when he married, so he was used to routine and regulations of royal life. But what he wasn't used to was the way the courtiers treated him, because they saw him as a foreigner and an interloper, and probably someone that wouldn't be faithful to his wife. So they didn't like him at all, and they made it very plain that they didn't like him. So he had a very, very difficult time. Very difficult indeed, and also eventually had to be 2 steps behind his wife. In the beginning, they had a very, very happy marriage, very happy marriage. They had Clarence House as their marital home, and they also had a country house which they rented in Windlesham Manor. So they had it all at the beginning, but it was for such a short time. I think the day-to-day life of the monarch is very regimented. I mean, she would be woken, that's about 7:30. She would have, her dresser would come in with a cup of tea and some biscuits for the dogs. Her clothes would be laid out. She would dress, have breakfast, and then read the newspapers and listen to the radio, and then her day would start, and her private secretary would bring her important letters to look at and sign. And then every 20 minutes during the day, there is an appointment. So it's the same every day during the working week. So it is a very regimented life. At the time of the Golden Jubilee, a lot of us press were invited to a reception at Windsor Castle and to meet the Queen and Prince Philip, the sort of thing that Prince Philip really hates. And I sort of was quite near the front of the fray, if you like. And I thought, well, I've got to say something. So I said to Prince Philip, what are you looking forward to most about the Jubilee? And he turned to me and he said, when it's over. I'll never forget that.
At Guildhall, the Lord Mayor of London, Sir Edmund Stockdale, led the city's tribute to the royal travellers. The Duke of Gloucester, who toured Nigeria with the Duchess, Princess Alexandra, who toured Australia, and Prince Philip, a worldwide traveller, who replied for the royal guests.
Lord Mayor, I dare say you have frequently had the experience of killing two birds with one shot. But I wonder how many Lord Mayors have had the experience of killing, by kindness, 4 Royal Highnesses at one banquet. So it is, of course, a matter of great regret to us all that the Queen cannot be present today. But as you realize, she has other matters to attend to. However, I know that she will be delighted to receive your very charming and thoughtful message at this particular moment.
First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness. I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her 2 boys. This week at Balmoral, we have all been trying to help William and Harry come to terms with the devastating loss that they and the rest of us have suffered. No one who knew Diana will ever forget her. Millions of others who never met her, but felt they knew her, will remember her. I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death.
I think that the death of Princess Diana was the biggest crisis of the Queen's reign, and probably something that historically she will be judged by. And I think, despite the film The Queen, and despite The Crown, people still think the Queen handled it badly and didn't seem to understand what her subjects were feeling and thinking. But I think the Queen didn't understand, because traditionally, the royal family, when there is a death, and there've been many, many, they mourn quietly amongst themselves. And the Queen thought, because of William and Harry, it would be utter cruelty to expose them to crowds of wailing people, and that they must be kept at Balmoral. But it actually was wrong, as it turned out. But she remedied the situation, but I think it will still be seen as probably one of the disasters of her reign. Prince Philip's relationship with the Princess of Wales is really interesting, because when she first came on the scene, she was terrified, absolutely terrified. And he kind of, he looked out for her because he knew what it was like to be a stranger amongst his family. And he would sort of, say, suggest to the Queen that perhaps she sat next to him at the black tie dinners at Balmoral, and that he could look after her. But in fact, she was absolutely tongue-tied when she was next to him, because he was funnier and wittier. But eventually, she sort of got to know him. And he was very supportive of her during the marital difficulties. And he wrote her a series of very constructive letters, trying to help her and pointing out various things like, the monarchy is not a popularity contest, which is something he could have said to Meghan much later. It's really not, it's not about the individual, it's about all of us working together for the same end, which is the good of the monarchy. And he wrote to her a lot. And these letters came to light during the inquest, when Mohammed Fayed accused Prince Philip of possibly, trying to kill Diana, to get rid of her. And then, so reluctantly, these letters were produced. But sadly, later on, Diana and Philip fell out massively. And she came to really dislike him. And we also know that that is completely true, because again, during the inquest, one of her friends, Roberta Dvorak, said under oath, you know, that he was in an airport with Diana, and she pointed to something referring to Prince Philip and said, "I hate him, I absolutely hate him." And she told me that she hated him too, and that he used to shout at his staff. And she said, "I tell my boys I never want anyone to shout at their staff like their grandfather did." So, but Diana was like that, you know, she loved people, then she hated them. And at the time, you know, at the last months of her life, although she didn't know, obviously, but she really disliked Prince Philip intensely.
I'm naturally somewhat biased, but I think our children have done rather well under very different and difficult and demanding circumstances. I hope we can be forgiven for feeling rather proud of them. And I'm also encouraged to see what a good start the next generation is making. I think that the main lesson that we've learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. It may not be quite so important when things are going well, but it is absolutely vital when things get difficult. And you can take it from me that the Queen has the quality of tolerance and abundance.
I think many people have asked the Queen and asked Prince Philip what is the secret of their relationship, and the Queen has spoken out on a few occasions, and she said patience, sense of humour, and she said famously, of course, that Prince Philip had simply been her rock and her stay over the years, and he'd always been there to support her. Although he never involved himself in constitutional affairs, he was there as a sounding board. He was someone to listen and someone who would be on her side or would give her criticism, which of course nobody else really could.
Our humble and hearty thanks to all those in Britain and around the world who have welcomed us and sustained us and our family in the good times and the bad so unstintingly over many years. This has given us strength, most recently during the sad days after the tragedy of Diana's death. It is you, if I may now speak to all of you directly, who have seen us through and helped us to make our duty fun. We are deeply grateful to you, each and every one. Yesterday, I listened as Prince Philip spoke at the Guildhall, and I then proposed our host's health. Today, the roles are reversed. All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. Frequently, we have discussed my intended speech beforehand, and as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright manner. He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Well, many people have asked Prince Philip how he wants to be remembered, and he says, well, I won't be around, so I don't care, do I? But I hope he'll be remembered for what he's done for conservation and what he's done for the sciences. I think he'll be remembered for his Duke of Edinburgh Award, because it bears his name. And I think he will also be remembered for his gaffes, which is a bit of a shame, but I think when people think of Prince Philip, they think of, oh, Philip and the ladies, and Philip and his politically incorrect remarks. And sometimes those things stick.
You've not seen the world's most experienced pluck on there.
Prince Philip has never been politically correct. He doesn't care what he says or to whom. He doesn't mean to be rude. Basically, he's known for his gaffes, which is what we call them in the UK, and they are usually some very witty asides, which he says to kind of break the ice and to make people feel a bit more relaxed. But they don't always come out like that. Sometimes they sound incredibly rude. And so he's become known as this, as someone who can really put his foot in it. But he actually does it to try and keep the moment light-hearted, because these endless royal engagements, can be very, very tedious. And Prince Philip has a very quick mind and a very quick wit, but it can be cruel. I think, well, Prince Philip doesn't suffer fools. And if he thinks someone's asking an idiotic question, he just walks away, or is rude. But, when you think how many years he's had to listen to that, and also he feels that probably people aren't that interested in him, they're interested in who he is. And I think that's always irritated him. So I think that he just shows it where other people wouldn't show it. And certainly, I've been on the receiving end of some of his rudeness on many occasions, and he does just walk away, which is very disconcerting. But that's what he does. Prince Philip is an icon now. We know he's going to probably say something outrageous, and he can get away with it. So I think people love it, that he will actually say a lot of the things that they are thinking, but certainly, we would never dare to say, because it's too difficult to voice your opinions too loudly at this present moment in time. But let Prince Philip do it. I think we rather miss his acerbic remarks. I think Prince Philip is a lot more sensitive than people give him credit for. And he is sentimental, but he's learnt through the years to bury his emotions so carefully. Like you never see him and the Queen being tactile in public. In fact, you very, very seldom see Prince Philip being tactile to anyone. I remember at the day of Diana's funeral, when the coffin went under Admiralty Arch, he put his arm round Prince William. And occasionally, I think I've seen him with his arm round Prince Edward, but you really don't see that. So I think it's buried very deep. And also there is the public persona and the private persona. Apart from flying, which he loved, he took up polo, especially when he was in Malta. And he, like everything that Prince Philip does, he wanted to be the best. So he practiced polo, and he actually became very good for an amateur. And he played polo for many, many years. And then he was forced to give it up because he had terrible arthritis in his hands. And he tried every crackpot remedy to try, to get rid of the arthritis. But in the end, he had to give up polo, and he took up carriage driving. And he completely turned the sport of carriage driving around, and he made new rules, and he actually made it into an international sporting event. So he did, losing him to polo was really very much a gain of carriage driving. So that's probably what he's going to be remembered for, because those are the most recent pictures we have of him. He still drives, his team of fell ponies around Sandringham and Windsor until very recently.
Last couple of times that I've seen him, he's absolutely ramrod back, hand behind his back, of course, dressed immaculately. He has a valet to help him with those things, of course, but he looks amazing. And until quite recently, of course, was still going out in all winds and weathers carriage driving, which was his great passion. And so, he has always kept extremely fit over the years. He's a great example.
It's very much in character for Prince Charles to pay a visit to somebody who's ill in hospital, and not least his father. On the other hand, it's very unlike the Duke of Edinburgh to receive visitors, because by and large he doesn't like any fuss, and he likes to stay put and read a book. But having said that, it's very nice that Prince Charles has gone to see him. He's been in there for a few days. He's clearly going to be in there for a few days more. So nothing nicer than to see his son on a Saturday afternoon.
He's a no-nonsense sort of man. I think he would be embarrassed by the fuss and would not want it. I'm sure he's in good spirits. He's always in good spirits.
Good. Well, back to work.